I need to double check the cloud. Make sure we still have space. Awesome. Nope.
Can't believe it's March.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Great. Well, thanks for bearing with us. We have typical Mondays going on here where we're a little bit disorganized. But yeah, we're gonna chat today about identity. I guess kind of the main thing for this is we feel like who you are isn't necessarily what you do, what you accomplish. And we want you guys to continue to develop your understandings about how you identify with running and other things in your life that you care deeply about. That way, in the event that you are injured or you fall short of a goal that you've had and you've been working on, you're able to work through that in a more productive way, in a way that doesn't cause, an internal crisis or an external crisis. And we see,
or just like cause anxiety or sadness in your life.
Exactly. I would consider those crises. At least for me, those are crises. If I'm sad,
I was thinking kind of more like low grade sad.
Low grade.
The low grade sad.
I'm a catastrophizer. How do you say that? Catastrophicizer.
Catastrophizing.
That maybe.
I feel like I could spell that word, but I could never in a million years say it correctly out loud.
Not on a Zoom call.
Not on a Zoom call.
To 20 people.
Nope.
Yeah. So yeah, we feel like this is such an important topic, especially for athletes, because you guys, all of you identify with running in a deep way, or else you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be working with us. You wouldn't be involved in this community. You wouldn't be out in running in your extended communities and things like that. So if you in part didn't identify as a runner, you just simply wouldn't be here today. So, but we need to make sure that when we are identifying with these things, we're doing it in a healthy way.
Or maybe you I know we've had a lot of athletes who struggle to identify as runners. I feel like that's something I've felt in my own life. Like I've definitely, even as someone that literally runs a magazine about running and is a professional coach and is an elite runner, there have been times where I've struggled to own that aspect of my identity because I feel like it comes with a lot of baggage, or maybe I don't necessarily check all the boxes, or I feel like there's some amount of gatekeeping around the term. And I feel like that's led in my life, and still does sometimes lead to, kind of a feeling of am I enough? Am I really a runner? Or when am I actually a runner? Until Hoka's paying my rent, am I a runner? And, I think that that's being able to set the terms for my own identity rather than allowing external factors to set those terms for me.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And maybe before we dive too deeply into that, we should start by talking a little bit more generally about what we feel like identity is, or the layers of identity that kind of make up who you are.
So when you look at what your identity is, there's a lot of people think of it in terms of there being 3 layers. And the first layer is the superficial layer. That's superficial you. That's your hobbies, activities, what you do in a day, running, writing, things like that, things that are more tangential to your core, but there's still things you can be very invested in. It can make you very happy, but they're still a little bit surface level-y.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's that second layer?
The second layer is your personality. So your deeply ingrained habits and the energy that they create in your life. So things that are still they're getting closer to the real you, maybe, whether you identify as a very friendly person, a generous person, I forgot what's the word for when you like people?
When you're a people liker?
Not a people liker, but like you're not extrovert.
Extrovert. Yeah.
Extrovert.
You're just talking about how you're an extrovert.
Huge extrovert fail. I've been on like so many Zoom calls. I'm oververted at this point. Just like whatever like aspects of your identity are, in that kind of that layer of who you are. And then the like third layer is deep you. That's that core aware. And that's like the awareness of who you are. The part of you that can sense when things are wrong, when things are right. So it's kind of like an amalgamation of your core values and like selfhood and intuition.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Deep you is your core values combined with your intuition. Yeah. So why are we really talking about this? I think that it's just like when you really like something, when you love something, when you feel passionately about it. Running is a great example because we all have on this call have that in common, and we identify with so much more than that too. But when it comes to running, it's something that becomes like almost part of us. So this would be kind of maybe a bit of a blurry bit of superficial you plus personality you and deeper you, because as we've talked about before, I feel like running is a vehicle for self-expression, for expressing some of the things that you value, whether you value community or you value being a good role model as a coach, or whether you value, I don't know, pushing your potential and seeing where that lies. Those things are all part of deeper you, and they all reflect your personality too. And the superficial part is running. It's superficial.
Right. Because like you could embody those things like through, you can embody those things when you play guitar. I can embody those things when I write. Like at the end of the day, the activity doesn't technically matter. Like you can embody all of those things like as a dog owner, like whatever it is. Even though you're like being a dog owner is probably not like incredibly central and core to your identity. That's still a way for you to think like, okay, as TJ, my core value is like to nurture and love.
Yeah.
That's like part, and like as my personality, I express that as an introvert. As my activity, I express that through running and dog ownership. Yeah. So like you can kind of think about like, what are these like superficial things that are kind of like the wallpaper on your identity? Mm-hmm. And I feel like for me, it's like running and writing. And I could use those to be like, okay, I like running because it connects me with the community. So then I get to like live my best extrovert life. But actually what that is a manifestation of my like deep need to be connected to other people and like kind of work in from the extraneous parts of your identity.
Yeah. And I guess sometimes when we do these calls, we're always trying to actively get in front of things that we feel like may cause us problems, right? Where there might be conflicts, or helping us to avoid things or reframe stuff. But I think we should preface this by saying like, identifying with these superficial activities, these hobbies, that's not a bad thing, right? Like this is a really positive thing. This is a natural thing.
Like if you had no connection to running, but you were running like 6 times a week, I would question I would have a lot of questions. What are you doing?
Yeah. And I think I just really wanted to say that because when you enjoy something and you engage in it like over and over again and so frequently, and it kind of assimilates into you. And I don't know if that's a great description, but because of that extra caring that you give that thing allows you to pursue it at higher levels. It allows you to take it in a direction, in whatever direction you want.
Right. It's about like having the right amount of investment. Because if you're over invested, then like, I don't know, if you stub your toe and have to miss a day, you're going to go into like a full tailspin personal crisis. But if you're not not enough invested, then you'll stub your toe and be like, well, maybe I'll just never run again. Cause like, who cares? Why does it matter?
Yeah.
So it's just like so challenging to find that right balance between like being invested enough that it's like healthy and beneficial and helps you express your core values, but not to the point where you're putting like so much on running that it's like the only way for me to express my core values or like who I am as a person. Because that's a lot to put on running. That's a lot to put on anything.
Totally. And I think that's sometimes why, and maybe we can touch on this a little bit further along in the call, but why we don't want to put running necessarily on a pedestal as our only outlet. We don't want to make our athletic selves our only self, because we can get into some kind of troubled territory when we're unable to access those kind of outlets. Gosh, I think that, well, I guess we're headed in that direction now, since we've brought that up. But if we kind of let that superficial activity merge a little too much with like our self-worth and the direction that we're taking that activity and how we're pursuing it, if we let it merge a little too deeply with self-worth, where we start to assign a little too much value to the outcomes, that's when we can first start to see ourselves get into some trouble.
Yeah, I think like for me, like a good kind of litmus test for knowing, like, am I assigning too much value to a certain outcome, goal, or, whatever it is my self-worth now hinging on this thing? Like, for instance, if it's like racing or competition or accomplishments at work, I think it's really great to be invested in competition, and it's great to be invested in progress at work. But when I get to that point where I start to be like, okay, am I starting to like actually kind of hang amounts of my like how I value myself or how I want other people to value on these external factors? That's when it kind of starts to destabilize your identity, because the moment that who you are and how you identify depends on like other people's perceptions, other people's values, other people's measurements, then that's an unstable identity. And I think that's where you run into problems.
Yeah. So that's kind of one of our conflict scenarios, that moment where external validation and other factors outside of yourself start to destabilize kind of how you feel, right? Mentally and emotionally.
Like, let's say I like to think of myself as like a good runner. I go out, I have a bad day at a race. Does that suddenly make me a different person? No, it does not. It makes me the exact same person who just had a bad day at a race. But we all so easily mentally fall into that trap of being like, oh no, I just had a bad day at a race. I guess now that means I'm a bad person, or like I'm a bad runner. Like I am bad. Like I didn't just do bad. I myself am lesser because of what the outcome of this thing was. Like, even though it was just because, like, I don't know, it was muddy or whatever.
Yeah. Maybe steering away from running a little bit and maybe talking about something like work. I think that there are these times where I've dealt with athletes or I myself in previous jobs have had those moments where you feel like that job that you're doing, which I would consider to be more of that superficial thing, where that superficial things comes into conflict with my personality or my value system. I think we start to see a lot of conflicts happening there with athletes as well. And that's like a pretty common
What does
scenario.
That typically look like for you?
For me?
Or like, how do you see this show up for people?
I think it's when people start to feel like their job isn't reflecting their values. Whether that's, for example, you're working in an environment that caters to X, Y, or Z, and you're uncomfortable with that clientele. Maybe you don't like what they represent. Maybe that goes against you. I don't know. When I worked in restaurants in Aspen, I had I felt like very deeply about the fact that we were pandering towards, the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, and the rest of us could barely afford to pay our rent. We were really struggling, no insurance, really struggling, financially, and the lack of gratitude. And the fact that, like, in those situations, often the people above me, like my managers, were just pandering to those clients and not doing much for the employees. And I felt like that was in direct conflict with my value system. Like, that wasn't what I was taught. Like, I was taught to support the people around me. I was taught that, wealth isn't an excuse to get whatever you want. that being kind to people is really important. And no matter where you ascend socioeconomically, you need to do so with a strong grasp to your moral compass. And so like, I think for me, oh man, like work, past jobs, like definitely feeling like that superficial thing. Like I need to engage in this activity to get this income so that I am not out on the street, like quite literally. But it goes against my value system. So then you enter that scenario and you're not feeling good about it. And so then you're unable to give your best. And that's a really slippery slope. And I think that can happen. And I think that does happen a lot with athletes. Sometimes when they pick a goal that doesn't feel quite right to them, right? Like maybe you're
like, my friend is doing this 50K, so
yeah. Oh, we get that
I should do it too.
Yeah, I've heard that before. And it's just like tagging on to somebody else's goal or picking a goal that maybe is a bit of too much of a stretch.
Have you ever done that?
Picked a goal that was too much of a stretch.
And then over-identified with it.
Yeah, I think I have. I definitely have. I mean, I guess to bring a specific in in 2019, when I really wanted to run in the US Skyrunning series again, and because I wanted to win the series again, because I wanted to prove that I could do it to other people mainly, not really to myself, but I wanted like that external validation of it. I started to like really put a lot of pressure on myself to go out and just to win. And like very naturally, like I just did so poorly and then abandoned the entire series to begin with. And it was that connection. It wasn't an honest connection to the goal. It wasn't a connection that responded
like,
to my
I love steep races and the
Yeah.
kind of training that they facilitate. So I'm going to go do all these steep races. It was like, I need to do these steep races so I can get like a badge for my Strava or whatever.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was more like I need to do these steep races to prove to my sponsors that I should be getting paid to do this. And to continue to prove to the trail running community that, I'm a great sky runner. I fully, and that, gosh, I did so poorly as a result of that. But to reverse it, in like the year that I won, I had no expectations on the outcomes whatsoever. It was my first time ever competing in sky races, so I didn't know what to expect. Mm-hmm. So I had that, that was on my side, right? Like not having the experiences helped me in those moments to detach from the outcomes and just to go out and run because I enjoyed it, because I loved the terrain, because I was, I loved the challenges, things that connected more to the deeper side. And when you're in alignment like that, between your deeper you and your superficial you, I think you tend to have more success. And when those things are in conflict with each other, you tend to not do as well, whether it's in work, whether it's in pursuing goals or whatever it is.
Right. I think, that's definitely the risks, like of being one of the challenges of being a professional athlete. What have you learned from a career as a professional athlete that is relatable to like the rest of us, like people like me who, have a career outside of athletics? Like, what have you learned from over-identifying with that narrow aspect of who you are as a person, right? Because like even when you were, like only an athlete, like before you were a coach and like doing all these other things, like what did you learn from that?
So much. I mean, honestly, like that's the greatest thing about this, right? Like if you're in a good state of mind when you're pursuing your goals, you're able to learn exponentially more. Rather, if you're completely focused on the goals themselves, the outcomes themselves, you tend to have blinders on. You forget that there's learning to be done along the way. You forget that you're engaged in a process that's grounded in love and passion and other things. And you tend to think very narrow-mindedly on like earning the next paycheck, keeping the roof over your shoulder, over your head, building the resume, all of those things. One thing, then another thing, and consistently having to have goals it becomes like unsustainable, you know, and you have those, or I definitely have had as a result of that, like a lot of moments of burnout, you know. And I think even as a professional athlete too, the social media side of it is like horrific. Just the constant necessity to post and to promote yourself, and then you get the likes, right? So like, oh, look at all this external validation. Somebody liked this photo of me skiing, or this story about my running race or whatever. You get, you know, your likes, and then you're like, oh, great, like this is how you feel good, and you forget that like you are the way to feeling good. What comes, you know, feeling good comes from within, not
right,
from
because it's
outside.
like that really fleeting feeling that afterwards you just end up feeling like so empty and like morally bereft that you're just oh, I have to like keep going back for more, you know, like right. Like a slot machine.
Yeah. So you post on Instagram every day and you try to like, I don't know, be related. I don't know. It's just a weird, it's a weird existence. I don't know if you guys notice, but I never post on Instagram anymore. I almost never use the platform at all. It's super rare. Sometimes I post to my story, but that's about it, because it's not a healthy outlet for anybody, let alone a human or an athlete. You know, I could go on and on about how I think that, you know, we as a business shouldn't even be on Instagram. But I love to follow you guys. So tag us if you want to use the app, but I think that it's an outlet for a lot of comparison. And when you're pursuing your goals, it's best that those goals really speak to the deeper you. Like I really connect on the deeper you. I'm a more introspective person. I'm not great in this forum in front of people. I'm not that good. I'm more behind the scenes. So like for me, yeah, the deeper connections are what keeps things sustainable, what helps me keep my blinders off, what helps me in the end stay focused, have more buy-in to the process, and like continue to develop my thought processes around the fact that like to be great at anything, it's a process, right? Like we're on this mastery like journey where every day we do a little bit to get better. And on the way, we might have some accomplishments, which are great, and they're a wonderful celebration of the process, but no one accomplishment is really any better than another. Yeah, I just, they're all just kind of like these celebrations of the work that you're doing, and the work you're doing exists outside of that, you know, and you feeling good about yourself exists far outside of whether you accomplish anything in your mind or the minds of others.
Yeah. Drew, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. So something that I wanted to mention was that as it pertains to identity, something that I view as both, I guess, could be a good thing and a bad thing, or oftentimes I find my identity enveloped in what other people in my running community think of me. Where maybe a lot of people think, oh, that's Drew, he's the fast guy at wherever. Or if I show up to a race, like, oh, if you want to, you know, finish top 3, you need to run with Drew. Just these really positive things that are very complimentary, and I appreciate. But on the back end of that, I feel a lot of pressure to live up to the identity that other people have bestowed upon me. And so I was wondering if maybe TJ and Zoe can maybe speak to some of that.
I think like something that really energizes me is trying to consistently surprise myself and other people as like a radical practice, and consistently destabilizing identities that don't feel appropriate or like authentic to me. Because like any real identity is obviously going to be something that I think is a lot more malleable and that like changes a lot more over time than maybe like we usually like to talk about or like give room to in our culture. And so I always think it's really fun to like, I don't know, like as a journalist, I love switching mediums so that I never become like, oh, she's just a writer, or like, oh, she's just a podcaster, because I think it is really fun and challenging to try to be excellent at different things and to constantly shift between the two as to not become over invested in one or the other. And I feel like, you know, TJ does a lot of the same thing in his athletic career. Like he was a professional skier, now is like, I mean, has embodied this identity as like a mountain athlete. But I feel like for me, intentionally finding ways to surprise myself, and to like not keep reinforcing things that don't feel good. Like, cause I think like it's that pressure, right? Of like, oh my God, what if I do something and like, I'm not the like, what if I put up a Strava time that's like really not that impressive? Like, are people going to think differently of me? A great way to get over the fear and discomfort of that is to put up the opposite of a fast time, to like do those things, right? To like prove, to like destabilize people's perceptions. And like that may feel really weird and uncomfortable, but I think it's a really great way to kind of like, I don't know, work through that discomfort and like, just like constantly be affirming to yourself that who you are isn't like the pace you run. It's not the words you write. It's a lot of things.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that, oh man, and we're talking a little bit about comparison again, because I think that kind of bleeds into a lot of this and so many different facets of kind of the psychological side to being an athlete or a human. But it's really important to affirm to yourself over and over again that what you're doing is important because it speaks to who you are. I know that, when you are considered like the fast guy or like,
the funny girl, the funny or like whatever.
Yeah, like however people might, think of you. I think it's okay if you identify with that and you want to embody those things, if you feel like they're positive for you, then that's great.
But I think when it turns into a sense of pressure, that's a sign that it's maybe not feeling authentic, and that it's like there's pressure comes from the outside. And so we need to, reinforce our identities against external things.
I would agree, but I think it's also really important to look at the internal side to that too, where we can put our own pressures on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, am I diversifying my how many different outlets I have for my writing? Is it not just podcasting, but it's also now writing for this magazine and that magazine, and that, I don't know, all the things that you do, right? Like, so you can put pressure on yourself to continue to like diversify those like micro identities within being a writer. And I think yes, it is really important to have that diversity, because if you put everything into one thing, it's very easy to put that one thing on a pedestal and then overemphasize what that is. I'm a skier. I'm just a skier. I know I have a lot of people who say TJ's a skier. Why does he run? Like, to some people, it makes no sense. But to me, it makes a lot of sense why I've been running for the last 10 years. It's because I for so many reasons, it identifies to me, to my why, my purpose. And I don't necessarily think that you have to explain that to anybody. As long as you're able to feel secure in it yourself, that's the most important thing. And the way to be secure in that yourself is to spend internal time, working on affirming that to you, that speaks to you at a deep level, that's important. If something reflects your values, that's important. And that's all the explanation that you need to give it. You don't need to give it any more explanation to anybody. The onus, if the issue is with them, if they want something more from you, if they can't accept that. I really firmly believe that. And I think that, yes, another great way to do that is to continue to just say, I do this, but I also like to do this. I do this too, and I like to do this too. And like, you may prioritize those things in different ways and dedicate certain amounts of time to each specific like superficial piece of your life or of your identity. And that's totally fine to have those priorities, but to have other things, right? More than just one thing or two things, like Zoe, you're a writer, but you're also an athlete, and you're also like really into cross training, and you're a friend. Like,
it's a hell of a Tinder bio.
You're a friend and you're a partner, and like, you're an entrepreneur, and like, you have like, those are all parts of your identity, right? Like, that's my perception of your identity. and a lot more, right? That doesn't even get to your personality. Those are just the superficial kind of extensions of the things that you care about. And to have all of that makes up, you know, the entirety of you plus more. That's obviously a kind of a short-sighted look at just who you are. But it's important to note that, like, if I was to take running away from you, you wouldn't disappear. You wouldn't go away. You would still be Zoe.
It, though. Like, I think that's one of the things that makes injury so hard, is when you have something that's like so central to like who you are that you suddenly can't engage in. It feels like this very like scary thing, because you're like, oh my God, like, who even am I if I can't run? Like, I don't want to identify as like garage cyclist, you know? And I think that that's one of the amazing gifts that injury can provide, is an opportunity to explore other, like, reinvest in other parts of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious if you know, in the beginning of the call, you mentioned that, you know, we have athletes who come to Microcosm and they totally write off like their athletic selves. Totally. They like start these emails off with like, hi, I'm TJ and I've been dabbling with running for about 10 years. I'm not an athlete though. I'm not, you know.
I feel like this is the most common thing we get. Like,
strange.
The majority of emails of people like reaching out to us. And like, I totally get, like, I 100% know I wrote the same email to my coach. I was like, you know,
right?
I'm not a real runner. I just, you know, am recovering from a 100-mile, like, you know, we find these amazing ways to protect ourselves from vulnerability. And sometimes that means not identifying with the things that we like love most, and kind of like being our own gatekeepers. Like, I've always wanted to be a runner. Like, that was just something that was very important to me growing up. I really just wanted to run. Like, I thought runners were cool. It seemed like a really cool, hard thing. I wanted to be that person, and I wasn't sure I could be until I just started doing it. And so, like, I've always had some amount of insecurity over calling myself an athlete and a runner. And I see that impulse in a lot of our athletes as well. They're like, oh, I'm not a real runner. I only run like, you know, XYZ miles a week. And I'm like, are you kidding? That's like an amazing amount of training. Yeah. Like, that's very consistent training. Like, if you own running shoes, like, good enough for me, you know? And I think that like it's just a way of protecting ourselves from, you know, like the heartbreak and the like hard part of being like not living up to what we maybe want our potential to be. And like, as soon as you just allow yourself to be like, yes, I am a runner. Like, I'm not just a runner, but I am a runner. Then you really open yourself up to like becoming that amazing athlete, that amazing person that you want to be. Yeah. I think it just comes through like really like reflecting on like what parts of your identity are important to you, and like having confidence in owning them.
Sure. And trying to approach yourself with a little less judgment, right? Like, I'm not a runner until I run 20 miles a week. Well, if you're out there working towards your goals, if you're getting out and running, if you're thinking about running, if you're, you know, involved in these conversations, you're a runner. Yeah. You're a runner no matter what, you know. You're a runner if you only dream about running and you haven't even taken your first step yet. You know, to me, you know, that self-judgment, having to put different benchmarks on things can really inhibit kind of how we like healthfully connect with those facets of who we are. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe to do some more questions. Do you have any tips for becoming more secure with your identity? I feel like that kind of follows really well with this last little topic.
Yeah, I think, you know, kind of broad strokes recommendations can be things like journaling, therapy, like any kind of introspection that helps you get closer to who you are, and kind of protecting yourself from those external factors that are maybe going to change your answer about who you are and what your value is, and constantly affirming to yourself that those things are good and worthwhile.
Yeah, totally. I think it's so important to take that time for introspection, right? To reconnect to that deeper you, you know, to affirm to yourself that if you're doing something that feels good to you, if it reflects your values, you know, then you are embodying that thing. And it's really important to continue to reinforce those positive thoughts. I think, mindfulness training and meditation can be really, really helpful for this, just to approach challenging situations with less judgment, to help be more present in the moment. So you're able to gain more from challenging adverse situations. So you're able to kind of expand your perspective, or be better at zooming out, more naturally zoom out instead of zooming right in on that goal. I find that at least for me has been really helpful in continuing to build my security, myself, and my self-esteem around what I do and what my pursuits are and things like that.
Yeah, and Virginia says it also goes back to being hard to ask for help. And I totally agree. And something that has blown my mind recently is I was reading this study that was trying to pinpoint the top 5 factors in people who are resilient. And factor number 2, the most common factor in people who demonstrate resilience, is ability to ask for help when they need it. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I love that, because our culture is not great at promoting the idea that it is good and worthwhile to ask for help. And I think that that is such an amazing skill, right? Is knowing where your capacity to improve and grow ends, and where your ability to lean on other people for help and growth and development begins. And I think that is so, so amazing. And so many people, I think another big thing we get from people who are curious about coaching is they're like, well, I kind of want to coach, but I'm not sure that I'm good enough for a coach. And I think that, our fear of being vulnerable has amazing ways of telling us that we're simultaneously well, you're not good enough to want to get better, right? That's such a weird, twisted line of thinking, but I've been there so many times in my own athletic career.
Yeah. What do you do when you fall short of a goal?
Oh man, I love this. I think one of the most amazing things about failing is that nothing changes. There's been no, particularly athletic failure, even career failure. I've written some absolutely garbage podcasts, articles, put them out into the world for thousands of people to listen to and comment on, and it's always been fine,
Yeah.
Or I've gone out and I've had just horrible races, and it's been fine. Nothing changes. We still go out to get pizza afterwards. I still go to work on Monday after, if I win a race or if I do terrible at a race, I go to work. People treat me the exact same. People value me the exact same, interact with me the exact same. I think it's just so worth practicing failure, embracing moments of failure, being wow, it's such a relief to know that I can go out and have just the worst workout of my life, and then I can go home and I don't know, kick ass at making dinner or something, and nothing about the world changes, nothing about who you are changes because of the outcome of one particular thing.
I think some things to think about are, when you fall short of a goal, do you fall short of that goal with grace or with deep self-criticism and negative self-talk? Do you fall short of that goal with a lot of self-judgment and things like that? And I think it's important, at least for me and for athletes that I'm coaching, to continue to reinforce the fact that those goals, they don't define you, right? What really defines a person in my mind is, are they loving? Are they caring? Are they a good person? Do they express gratitude? Do they know appreciation? Do they,
that scene in Ted Lasso where Roy is retiring from soccer, and so Keely interviews Roy's niece about what she loves the most about Roy, and she's like, what are your 5 favorite things about Roy? And she's like, well, he buys ice cream, he swears, he's funny, and he reads me books. It had nothing to do with his identity of an athlete. It's this thing that he was assigning so much value to was something that someone that he loved the most didn't even register with her, and I think that that's how a lot of our identities are. And Ted Lasso is an absolutely PhD level exploration of identity. Everyone watch it.
Yeah, I think that's just it's so important to realize like your goals and accomplishments, those are amazing things. And I don't ever want to take those away from you. But in the end of the day, most people won't remember that you won that race.
Right. Like who on earth are you friends with because like they won something or they got, your friends because you're like, man, well, ideally, this dude shows up to help me move, know, or like this gal always texts me back. Like, I love that, right. Or like this person, whatever their qualities are, the things we love about other people are the things that sometimes we struggle to love the most about ourselves, or the things that we have the most discomfort with. And so sometimes like reflecting on like, man, like what I love about like Kristen is that she's like really there for people. And she's like really smart and kind and like shows up for people. Like if I named 9,000 things I loved about Kristen, her being fast wouldn't even register. Although she is fast, it's just like not the thing that I love about her.
I would agree. And I think it's just so important to remember that. Like people will remember those qualities, those expressions of your personality and your deeper you, much more so than your accomplishments in the superficial you part of your identity. Although those things are important, they're not all that there is. In fact, in the way that we prioritize, I look at prioritizing those things, I think they kind of come towards the bottom. And we've talked about that before, in other calls too. And I love it.
When I was injured, I was working with mental performance coach Addie Bracey, and she had me draw a pie chart that I had to divvy up for my identity. And she had me start with like, she was like, first, she had me do it several times. And the first time I did it, she's like, I want you to just like draw a pie chart and assign how much of it you think of as you as an athlete, and do that first before you fill in all the other things. And so I did that, and then I filled it in, and I noticed I was like running out of space to write like all these other things. Like I'm kind, like I love cooking, because I was forced to think of myself as an athlete first. I assigned way too much of my pie chart to that very small part of who I am. And then when she reassigned it to me later, saying like, think about what you think other people love about you, I put the fact that I was an athlete as like just a tiny little slice of the pie. And then there was much more room for all these like wonderful other things.
And now after watching Ted Lasso,
I've just transcended identity. I think, I would say my number one identity is as a Ted Lasso fan.
That makes up
99% of my identity is just Ted Lasso.
That's healthy.
It is healthy.
It wouldn't be if it wasn't Ted Lasso.
Anything else would be inappropriate.
Yeah, that's great. I also kind of wanted to ask, I think this is such a great question for you, Zoe. How can you put less emphasis on the goals you're pursuing while still striving for those goals?
Yeah, I think, recognizing like this is a thing I want, but like, even if I get it or I don't get it, again, nothing's going to change. I can still go eat the same pizza afterwards. I'll have the same job. I'll have the same partner. I'll have the same worth. And just really reaffirming that. And like also recognizing that it's okay to want things, right? Like we're not here to say like, have zero, don't invest in it at all.
Have
like
no
we want
aspirations.
You to, right. We want you to have aspiration. I mean, we want you to do it in a way that feels good for you. It doesn't matter what we want. It matters what you want. Invest in things to the extent that it feels good to you, insofar as it doesn't take up parts of your pie that are your value, like how you value yourself.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think if you're striving for something, say athletically, you really embrace the fullness of your athletic life. You're getting your runs in every week. You work with the coach. You set goals that are challenging but realistic. You cross train. You engage in reading materials about running and all of these things that you pursue. It's like that's super great. And like taking that full ownership, I think is like vital to striving for, goals, to wanting to have success. But making sure that you spend time with other outlets too is a way to continue to de-emphasize the fullness of your athletic life. And like, it's important to love to express yourself that way, to want to be out there on the trails all the time. But I think, at least for me, it continues to be absolutely vital to my mental health and my successes as an athlete to recognize that that's just a small piece of really who I am. And if you let it be the end all be all, that's where you start to get really disappointed when you fall short of a challenging goal, or maybe you have a setback and you have to do some down weeks, or you have to fully rest because you've got an injury. It makes it also a lot harder to be flexible. As a mountain athlete like myself, like in the winter, I ski. I like to ski mountaineer, and I have a lot of goals and pursuits in that area. And if I hang on too much to the running, it gets really hard to go and to pursue those things that bring me a lot of joy. So again, like those blinders can come on if you overemphasize one thing more than others. So it helps to be fully engaged in other things, to spend your time and to prioritize and set boundaries, compartmentalizing, certain aspects, certain superficial pursuits, so to say, to go back to how we kind of define those activities earlier. This is a personal question. Since you asked me one earlier, I'm going to have to give it back to you. Have you ever been devastated by a goal you didn't achieve?
No.
Why?
Well, I mean, so like I had a pretty big DNF at Leadville, but it was the best day of my life because it opened my eyes to the fact that I was doing things the wrong way, and that I could be really good at running if I asked for help and leaned on people more, instead of just like, I used to like run with this chip on my shoulder being like, oh, I don't have like fancy sponsors or like a coach. I just do it all on my own. And I was just, I just like was like angry about stuff. And because of it, my running and mental health suffered. And then a DNF taught me that, again, like the next day I woke up, we got pizza and nothing had changed.
Yeah.
Like no one cared. I think it was a really amazing, transformative moment for me because I didn't feel sad at all. People kept asking me if I felt sad or disappointed that I DNF'd, and I didn't at all.
Well, I
had tried really hard.
Totally. And I think that's what people cared about most. People didn't care whether you won or lost the race or finished or not. People cared if you felt like you did your best. People cared if you felt like you got something out of it, right?
Yeah.
So like people weren't assigning a lot of emphasis to whether you performed the way you wanted. And although you were pushing yourself really hard on that day and going for it, which is the ultimate way to get a DNF, it's, you better,
swing for the
fences. But yeah, it's important to realize, I think that with the people that really matter in your life, they just were most concerned that you were okay, that you were,
and I thought I would be sadder.
You still loved running and things like that after, because as coaches, we've seen
anyone can run like 100 miler or like one race or like train for 1 year, right? Like the people that become excellent and the people that are constantly, like really trying to seek fulfillment, or the people that stay engaged much longer than any one belt buckle, any one, Strava milestone, whatever it is.
Yeah, well, I think a part of your personality is being that learner, wanting to take things from those hard moments and then as quickly as you can reapply them to the process. Yeah, build a podcast based on your, whatever it is. I mean, that's just, super awesome, actually. That whole podcast idea came from a failure like that.
Yeah.
And it's just being able to, I think, just pick yourself up in those moments and not beat yourself up and try to do it with grace. Is just huge. And I'm sure whenever it is that you run Leadville and you do really well, you'll finish with grace.
And I think like I always had this feeling where like, man, I really feel like I'm a 100-mile runner. I guess I need to run 100 miles to prove it. And now I'm kind of like, no, I'm the same person the whole time.
Yeah.
Belt buckle, no belt buckle, whatever it is, like I'm the same amount of tough as I was that day that I got scraped off the trail.
Yeah. And no matter what, you're still, enough.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to sum up these tools, guys, because I think that's really important to be working on this stuff all the time. It's not just something that you can listen to a talk on and then let fall to the wayside. You know, a lot of the big topics that we talk about are things that we're constantly engaging with in order to just better our lives and have better experiences in the things that we are pursuing and the things that we care about. So, you know, the stuff that we thought was really helpful is journaling and spending some time with introspection. You can use that to maybe develop or write out those kind of like deeper you identity layer. Explore that, you know, what makes up your value system, what guides you internally to pursue the goals that you pursue, to pursue the activities that you love and enjoy. I think also mindfulness training and meditation are just absolutely vital. Without that kind of restful, peaceful state in which you can enter your subconscious mind and start to develop the affirmations that continue to build you up and build up your self-worth. Without that, I think we leave a piece off the table. You can really reprogram the way that you believe about yourself, the things you believe about yourself, and it's just super helpful. Another big thing is just reframing how we strive for goals. And just accepting that it's okay to want things. It's okay to pursue things.
What become the problem is when you need them to be who you are.
Exactly. And so just trying to, again, and I think meditation and mindfulness is a great way to have a space to start to like build out these thought processes of saying like, I don't need these things. I want these things. I will be fine without these things. Yeah. And owning your goals, but just don't put them on a pedestal. If running is something that you love, just let that identity be kind of porous, right? Like own it, but make sure it's not the only thing that you have. And then focus on the journey, not the outcomes. That's one of the biggest, I think, at least for me, if I'm going to prioritize these things, it's mindfulness and it's also focusing on the journey. Everything process oriented, you know, we love it. The mastery approach, getting a little bit better each day and just loving that. And knowing that if you take things one step at a time, you're building this big foundation. I think Zoe has the best analogy for it. It's like every run is a tiny grain of sand that you're using to build this wonderful sandcastle. And I really like that way of looking at things.
Taken from Alexi Pappas. It's not my metaphor.
Ah, darn it. Well, I'm calling it yours because I learned it from you. Yeah, I think that's it. Own your athletic journeys, guys. And just know that you're enough, whether you race or you don't, whether you win or you lose. You will always be
honestly,
enough.
If you win Western States or like just show up to your first ever group run, you are the same to me.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you've got any topics you'd like to hear us talk about or questions for the next couple weeks, we'd really appreciate it if you emailed us because this is an athlete driven process. So
yay.
Yeah. Take care, guys. Have a great night. Bye.